All right, let's dive into this.
Okay.
I think everyone knows the story of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, but
Yeah.
I don't think as many people know what happened afterwards. So we're going to kind of pick up the story from there. And we're going to be looking at two iconic figures.
Yeah.
Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull.
Right.
We've got a bunch of different sources. We've got some historical accounts. We've got some military reports.
Right.
And we've even got some firsthand descriptions of Crazy Horse from folks who actually knew him.
Yeah, that's right.
So pretty interesting stuff. And our mission here is to trace the path of these two leaders after this monumental victory they had at Little Bighorn.
Yeah.
And to try to understand how this moment of, incredible triumph actually became the beginning of their end.
It's a story, a fascinating story that kind of goes from the highest highs to some pretty low lows.
Oh, yeah?
And it's filled with shifting power dynamics, broken promises, and ultimately a real profound sense of loss, I think.
So let's just jump right in. Let's start right after the battle,
Okay.
right? The Lakota just won this incredible victory against Custer.
Right.
They're on top of the world. But then they decide to split up. Why?
Well, I think, a lot of people forget that the Lakota were a nomadic people
Mm-hmm.
and they followed the buffalo.
Yeah.
Their lives were completely intertwined with the buffalo.
Right.
And the buffalo herds at that time were, they were starting to dwindle.
Right.
So this wasn't just a strategic decision. It was also a matter of survival.
Okay, so they're splitting up because they need to find more resources.
They need to find sustenance, absolutely.
Makes sense.
And you also have to remember that, the Lakota Nation itself, it wasn't like, monolithic entity.
Right.
There were different bands, different priorities, different leaders.
Okay.
Some folks were inclined towards peace.
Yeah.
Others were more inclined towards, continued resistance.
Right, yeah. Okay, so what about the U.S. government? How do they react to this defeat?
Well, let's just say they weren't going to take it lying down.
No, of course not.
Custer's defeat sent shockwaves
Yeah.
across the nation. I mean, this was a national humiliation.
Yeah.
And it really fueled this outrage and calls for revenge,
Yeah.
which then gave the government a really convenient excuse
Yeah.
to ramp up their military actions against the Plains Indians.
So they use this tragedy to push their own agenda.
To further their own agenda,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, and what did that look like? What did they actually do?
Well, they started passing some new legislation, and
Oh.
on the surface, it seemed like a compromise. They offered more rations, more supplies, in exchange for, the Lakota surrendering their claims to the unceded Indian territory, including the Black Hills.
Right.
But really, it was just a way to force the Lakota onto reservations.
Yeah.
And ultimately to control them and to erase their way of life.
And we see this time and time again.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like the classic story. We make promises, break promises, take the land.
Yeah. It's a very familiar story, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. And they weren't above, using some pretty underhanded tactics, were they?
Oh, no, they weren't. I mean, they really played on the divisions within the tribes. They turned some Lakota groups against others. I mean, classic divide and conquer.
Yeah. So you've got this internal conflict
Yeah.
that sort of mirrors the larger conflict
It is.
with the U.S. government.
And it makes the U.S. Army's job a lot easier.
Yeah, I bet. So who are some of the key players on the U.S. side?
Well, one figure who really emerges during this period is General Nelson Miles.
Okay. I've heard that name.
Yeah, he had the nickname Bear Coat
Bear Coat.
because of his, relentless pursuit of the Lakota.
So this is a guy who's not afraid to use force.
No, he led the winter campaign, which was,
Brutal time.
just brutal. I mean, imagine being out on the plains in the middle of winter.
Oh, yeah.
It was a harsh campaign.
Yeah. But he also, I've read that he wasn't just about brute force, right?
That's what's so interesting about him. He also understood the importance of negotiation.
Okay.
He actually met with Sitting Bull.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tried to persuade him to surrender.
Wow. So there was some attempt at diplomacy.
There was. And the accounts of that meeting are fascinating. I mean, you've got Sitting Bull, just defiant, proud, refusing to give up his freedom.
Yeah.
And you've got Miles, trying to use this combination of threats and promises to sway him.
Right.
But ultimately, Sitting Bull refused to budge. I mean, he saw through the government's promises.
So even in the face of this military pressure, there's still resistance.
Absolutely. But it comes at a cost.
I mean, this resistance, it couldn't last forever.
No, not under those conditions. I mean, they
Right.
were facing, dwindling resources,
Yeah.
the loss of their traditional hunting grounds,
Hmm.
and just the constant pressure of the U.S. Army.
Yeah. It must have been a truly desperate time.
It was. And you start to see that spirit of resistance, that fire that fueled the victory at Little Bighorn. It starts to, flicker a
Yeah.
little bit.
So what happens? Do people just start surrendering?
Many did, yeah. I mean, the conditions were just too harsh.
Yeah.
The pursuit was relentless. And, the psychological toll, it all just kind of became too much.
Yeah.
There's actually a particularly heartbreaking story about the Northern Cheyenne.
Okay. I don't know that one. What happened?
Well, they surrendered to General Crook,
Mm-hmm.
and they believed that, they would be allowed to stay on a reservation in their own territory.
Right.
But instead, they were shipped all the way down to Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. That's hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, hundreds of miles from their homeland.
So they were ripped from their land.
Yes, and when they arrived in Oklahoma, they were completely ostracized by the Southern Cheyenne.
Who were already there.
We're already living there.
So it's like a double whammy.
It is.
You're ripped from your land, and then
You're alienated from your own people.
it's a reminder of the cultural devastation that went hand in hand with the physical displacement. I mean, their way of life was just completely dismantled.
Wow. That's rough. So what about Crazy Horse? How's he reacting to all of this?
Well, Crazy Horse was a proud warrior.
Yeah.
He was a brilliant strategist.
Yeah.
A real symbol of Lakota resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But even he wasn't immune to all of these pressures.
Yeah.
So he does what many Lakota leaders did in times of uncertainty.
Okay.
He goes on a vision quest
Okay.
to seek guidance from the spirits.
He's looking for a sign.
He's looking for a sign, a path forward. And when he returns, he has no divine guidance to offer.
Oh, wow.
He doesn't have the answers.
So he goes on this vision quest
Yeah.
and comes back empty-handed.
Empty-handed.
I mean, that must have been
Imagine the weight of that.
Yeah.
I mean, your people are looking to you for leadership, for answers.
Yeah. And you've got nothing.
Yeah. So it's a real turning point
It is. It's a turning point in his story.
in his story.
We see this shift from the confident warrior to a leader grappling with doubt.
Right. So what happens next? I mean, does he just give up the fight?
Well, there are conflicting accounts of what happens next.
Right.
And this is where the historical record gets a little murky.
Oh, I love it when it gets murky. Lay it on me.
Okay. Well, some say that Crazy Horse agreed to help the U.S. Army fight another Native American tribe, the Nez Perce.
Wait, they wanted Crazy Horse to fight against other Native Americans.
It was a complex time.
Yeah.
A lot of shifting alliances, a lot of distrust on all sides.
Right.
And the interpreter involved, a man named Frank Grard, was not exactly known for his accuracy.
This Frank Gronder, he's the son of that fictional character Flashman, right?
That's right.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so the apple didn't fall far from the tree.
Right.
Both notorious embellishers. So, who knows what was actually said or agreed upon.
Oh, that adds a whole other layer.
It does.
of complexity to this story.
It does, absolutely. And unfortunately, this miscommunication,
Yeah.
or perhaps deliberate manipulation,
Right.
really contributed to growing suspicion around Crazy Horse.
So even though he surrendered, they still didn't trust him.
His reputation preceded him. I mean,
Okay.
he was a symbol of resistance,
Right.
and to the U.S. government that made him a threat no matter what.
Regardless of his actions.
Exactly. So, the stage is set
Yeah.
for this tragic downfall.
Okay. So take me there. What happens?
Well, the tension, the distrust, it all just escalates from here.
Okay.
There are rumors of plots against the government,
Right.
rivalries within the tribes.
Oh, interesting. Like a power struggle.
Exactly. And Crazy Horse, he senses the danger,
Mm.
and he tries to seek refuge with his uncle, Spotted Tail,
Spotted tail.
who was a powerful leader who had negotiated peace with the government.
So he's hoping for protection.
He is. He's relying on family ties.
Yeah.
But instead of finding safety,
Yeah.
he's met with this humiliating rejection.
Oh, wow.
Spotted Tail, perhaps fearing repercussions from the government, refused to shelter him.
Imagine that. You're going to your own family for help,
Yeah.
and they turn you away.
Devastating. Must have been absolutely devastating for him.
Yeah. So what does he do?
He decides to go back to Fort Robinson
Okay.
to plead his case,
Mm-hmm.
to try and clear his name.
So there's still...
It seems like he's still clinging to some hope,
Yeah.
some belief that reason might prevail.
Yeah.
Tragic miscalculation.
Oh, no.
The atmosphere at Fort Robinson was incredibly tense.
Okay.
Red Cloud's warriors were there, and the fort was swarming with armed cavalrymen.
So it's a powder keg.
It was a powder keg waiting to explode.
He walks right into it.
Right into the middle of it. One of the officers, Lieutenant Lee,
Okay.
he sees the danger, tries to warn Crazy Horse, but it's too late.
Oh, okay.
Orders had come down from General Sheridan to arrest Crazy Horse.
But they promised him safe passage.
Promises are easily broken
Yeah.
when fear and suspicion take hold.
Right.
The plan was to take Crazy Horse first to Chicago and then to an island prison off the coast of Florida.
An island prison.
Yeah. A far cry from the open plains.
That he called home.
Yeah. It was a deliberate tactic, to isolate him, to break his spirit, to essentially erase him as a symbol of resistance.
So does he try to escape?
He does. As he's being led away, he sees the guardhouse.
Yeah.
He sees the cell where his fellow Lakota are imprisoned.
Right.
And it's just this vision of the confinement that awaits him. And to him, that's a fate worse than death.
Right.
So he struggles against his captors.
Whoa.
Little Big Man and Captain Kennington.
Little Big Man. I thought he was...
Yeah, it was close friend.
From the Battle of Little Bighorn.
The same. Terrible betrayal.
Wow. So he's struggling and...
He is. And in the scuffle, Crazy Horse pulls out a hidden knife.
Right.
And he slashes Little Big Man's arm.
Okay.
It's a desperate act of defiance.
Yeah.
And in the chaos, Captain Kennington yells, "Stab the son of a bitch. Stab the son of a bitch."
That's chillin'.
And a private rushes forward.
Oh, no.
Plunges his bayonet into Crazy Horse's back.
So his premonition about not being shot came true.
It did, yeah.
But in a much more brutal way.
Yeah. He clings to life for a few hours.
Okay.
At one point he whispers, "I don't know where they stabbed me."
Oh, wow.
And then looking at his father, he says, "The white men are not to blame for this. It's the Indians who are to blame."
He's blaming his own people.
He must have felt so alone.
Yeah. No.
And he dies just before midnight with his father and touched the clouds by his side.
Wow.
His last words, a simple plea, "I just want to be left alone."
What a tragic end for such a powerful warrior.
Even in death, he refused to be an object of pity.
How so?
Well, when they carried his body into the adjutant's office, they tried to lay him on a cot.
Okay.
Crazy Horse refused.
He refused.
He chose to die on the floor.
On the floor. Why is that significant?
There's a really beautiful passage in Ian Fraser's book about the Great Plains.
Okay.
That kind of sums it up. He says, on the cot, he would have been, in some sense, ours, an object of pity, an accident victim, noble red man, the last of his race, etc., etc. But on the floor, Crazy Horse was Crazy Horse still.
Oh.
Powerful.
Yeah, like he's reclaiming his narrative.
Exactly. On the floor, he was no one's tragic hero. He was simply Crazy Horse, defiant to the very end.
Wow. So we've got this really heartbreaking story of Crazy Horse. But what about Sitting Bull?
Right.
He's up in Canada now, right?
He is, yeah. He fled to Canada with a group of his followers after the Battle of Little Bighorn, hoping to find, a safe haven, a place where his people could live in peace.
Right.
And at first, it seemed like he might. Canada welcomed him and his people. He even developed a sort of kinship with the Mounties.
Really?
Yeah. He praised Canada for its sense of honor and fairness.
Wow.
Which was a stark contrast to his experiences in the U.S.
Right.
But that peace didn't last.
It never does.
Unfortunately, no. The same forces that were decimating the Lakota way of life in the U.S. were also at play in Canada.
Right.
The buffalo herds were dwindling.
Yeah.
And there were conflicts with other Native American tribes who saw Sitting Bull and his people as competitors for resources.
So even in Canada, they couldn't escape at all.
Even in Grandmother's Land, as the Lakota called Canada.
Yeah.
They couldn't escape, the encroachment of the white man's world.
Right. And what's happening back in the U.S. at this time?
Well, Sitting Bull's legend is growing.
I bet.
He's becoming this mythical figure.
Yeah.
This symbol of resistance.
I can only imagine the stories.
Oh, there are all sorts of stories.
Right.
Some claim that he could read French, that he had studied Napoleon's military tactics.
Wow.
There was even a rumor that he was actually a white man
who
graduated from West Point and then went rogue.
Oh, man. It's like every defeated hero needs a mythology.
It's true. But the reality for Sitting Bull and his followers in Canada was far less glamorous.
Yeah.
By 1881, they were destitute.
Okay.
Their clothes were rotting off their bodies.
Wow.
Other tribes were circling their village like vultures.
So what does he do?
He makes the difficult decision to return to the United States and surrender.
Wow.
He was a broken man singing this song of lament. He said, "A warrior I have been, now it is all over. A hard time I have. Thank God it was short."
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So he surrenders. Does he have any hope left?
There's this really poignant moment when he surrenders his Winchester rifle.
Okay.
He tells his son to present it to the Americans, and he says, "I surrender this rifle to you through my young son, who I now desire to teach in this manner that he becomes a friend of the Americans. I want him to learn the habits of the whites and to be educated as their sons are educated."
So it's like a gesture of peace.
It is.
He's hoping for a better future for his son.
He's pleading for a better future,
Yeah.
but it's another empty promise.
Of course it is.
Yeah, instead of being allowed to live freely at Standing Rock,
Yeah.
as promised,
Mm-hmm.
Sitting Bull is imprisoned at Fort Randall for 2 years.
Wow. A prisoner of war, even though he surrendered peacefully.
It's a cruel twist of fate. They
Yeah.
gave him crayons and paper.
Okay.
And he just filled page after page with drawings of battles and buffalo hunts.
Right. It's like he's,
Images of a lost world.
yeah, reliving past glories while his present is crumbling.
It's a powerful image.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And the irony
Oh, the irony.
is that the U.S. government spent, an estimated $1 million.
$1 million.
For every Native American killed during the Indian Wars.
It's a staggering sum.
It is.
For a war they knew they couldn't lose.
Yeah. Why? Why the relentless pursuit?
It's a question that haunts this whole period of history.
Yeah.
Was it fear? Greed? This misplaced sense of manifest destiny? Probably a combination of all of those things.
Yeah. So, Sitting Bull, he's in prison for 2 years?
He is, and then he's suddenly released.
Just like that.
Just like that. No explanation, no apology.
No, nothing.
Nothing. They put him on a steamboat,
Okay.
ironically named the General Sherman,
Oh, come on.
and sent him back towards Standing Rock.
Oh, man. The irony. Talk about adding insult to injury.
What must have been going through his mind?
I know, right? Humiliation, anger, maybe even a sliver of hope.
Maybe.
And so he's on his way back to Standing Rock.
He is, and at each stop along the way,
Mhm.
he's greeted like a celebrity.
Really?
People want his autograph. They're cheering for him.
It's like he's this,
It's bizarre. It's this bizarre twist.
like a conquering hero returning from
Mhm.
exile.
Exactly.
Okay. So finally, he arrives back at Standing Rock.
In May of 1883.
Is this a homecoming? A new beginning? Or is it just
That's a great question.
another chapter
Yeah.
in this long and tragic saga?
That's the question we're going to be exploring
Nice.
in the final part of our deep dive.
In part 3.
What happened to Sitting Bull after he returned to Standing Rock?
Welcome back to our deep dive into the lives of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. We left off with Sitting Bull returning to Standing Rock. Was it truly a homecoming?
It was a homecoming in name only. I mean, Standing Rock, it offered a semblance of familiarity, but it
Yeah.
was a far cry from the free life that Sitting Bull had once known.
So what happened? Did he just sort of fade into the background and...
No, Sitting Bull was
Yeah.
never one to just fade away,
No.
but he was definitely walking a tightrope.
Okay.
I mean, he wanted to lead his people,
Right.
but he was under constant suspicion from the U.S. government.
Oh, I bet.
Mm.
And who was the Indian agent at Standing Rock at this time?
That was James McLaughlin.
McLaughlin. And he wasn't exactly known for being, sympathetic to the Lakota.
No, McLaughlin was a tough agent,
Yeah.
a real assimilationist. He believed that the Lakota needed to be civilized,
Right.
which basically meant abandoning their traditional ways and becoming, farmers and ranchers.
Right.
And he saw Sitting Bull's influence as a major obstacle to his plans.
So even though Sitting Bull is back on the reservation, he's still...
Yeah, he's surrounded by his own people, but
Yeah.
he's still a prisoner in a sense.
And McLaughlin, he's not making things any easier.
No.
Yeah.
He does everything he can to undermine Sitting Bull.
Like what?
Well, he limits his movements, prevents him from speaking publicly, even tries to turn his own people against him.
Oh, wow. It's like they're just waiting for him to slip up.
Exactly.
To give them an excuse to...
To lock him away for good.
Yeah, and this is all happening against a backdrop of immense upheaval for the Lakota. They've lost their land, their way of life.
Right.
The buffalo that sustained them.
Yeah. It was a period of real despair.
And into this despair comes a new spiritual movement.
The ghost dance.
Right, the ghost dance. Now, tell me about this. What was it exactly?
Well, it was a religious movement that promised a return
Okay.
to a time of abundance and harmony.
Okay.
It spread rapidly across the reservations.
And it offered hope?
It offered hope to a people who had lost almost everything.
Right, so it was a way to kind of reconnect
Yeah.
with their traditions.
Spiritual traditions.
Find solace in the face of all this suffering.
Exactly. It prophesied a world where the white man vanished,
Okay.
the buffalo returned,
Okay.
and the Lakota could live according to their own ways again.
But the U.S. government didn't see it that way, did they?
No, they were terrified. They saw the dancing, the chanting, the visions as a sign of rebellion, a threat to their authority.
Right, and of course they saw Sitting Bull as the mastermind
Oh, absolutely.
behind it all.
Even though there's no evidence that he was actively promoting the ghost dance,
They needed a scapegoat.
they needed someone to blame for their fear.
Yeah.
And Sitting Bull, with his history of resistance, fit the bill perfectly.
So what do they do?
Well, in December 1890,
Mm-hmm.
McLaughlin orders Sitting Bull's arrest.
Okay.
Claims he's afraid that Sitting Bull is going to use the ghost dance to incite an uprising.
But it sounds like he was just looking for an excuse
It's hard to argue with that.
to get rid of Sitting Bull.
Yeah. And the arrest itself was a chaotic and tragic event.
Oh, no.
As the Lakota police approached Sitting Bull's cabin,
Mm-hmm.
a scuffle breaks out, shots are fired.
Yeah.
Sitting Bull is killed, along with several others,
Oh, wow. Killed by his own people.
carrying out the white man's orders.
Yeah.
Another betrayal.
It's a devastating moment.
It is a tragic end for a leader who fought so hard for his people's freedom.
And it sets the stage for an even greater tragedy.
Yeah,
Wounded Knee.
just a few weeks later.
So after Sitting Bull's death, what happens?
Well, many of his followers, they flee,
Okay.
and they join a larger group of Lakota
Right.
who are camped at Wounded Knee Creek.
And this is where the 7th Cavalry catches up with them.
Custer's old regiment.
Right.
On December 29, 1890, they surround the Lakota camp.
Mm.
What happened next is still debated.
But we know the end result.
A massacre.
So tell me about that. What happened?
Well, as the soldiers were attempting to disarm the Lakota,
Mm.
a shot is fired.
Okay.
Whether it was an accident or intentional
Yeah.
is still unclear.
Okay.
But the soldiers respond with overwhelming force.
Okay.
They open fire on men, women, and children.
War.
Over 300 Lakota are killed.
Oh my gosh. Their bodies left frozen in the snow.
A horrific act of violence.
Yeah. A culmination of decades of broken promises,
Right.
forced assimilation,
Mhm.
and relentless pursuit.
It really marked the end of the Indian Wars
Yeah.
and the symbolic end of a way of life for the Lakota.
So where do we leave Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull? What do their stories tell us?
Well, they were complex figures, brilliant strategists, fierce warriors, spiritual leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately tragic figures.
Right.
I think their stories challenge us to look beyond these simplified narratives
Mm-hmm.
of heroes and villains to
Okay.
really grapple with the complexities of history.
They were fighting for their land,
Yeah.
for their way of life, their very survival.
And they were betrayed, imprisoned, and killed by the very people who had promised them protection.
Their stories are a reminder of the dark side of our
For
history.
brutal consequences of colonialism, the broken promises.
Yeah.
But they also offer a message of resistance, of resilience.
Even in the face of overwhelming odds.
Yeah, the human spirit can endure.
So we may never know the full truth of what happened to Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull.
But their stories are going to continue to resonate.
as long as we remember them.
As long as we strive to understand
Yeah.
the complexities of our shared history.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
Exploring the nuances, the contradictions.
The hidden stories
the hidden stories.
that shape our understanding of the world.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.